A lot's been happening in our nation's capital and around the country lately. If you've missed any of it, that's why we're here with another edition of the Political Roundup. Here to lend a hand with the Roundup is one savvy cowpoke, I'm not saying that. I'm never saying that again. Do you hear me? Hear me. I'm never saying that again. Joining us now to review some of these recent stories of interest live from the White House is our chief political correspondent. Let's begin with the passage of that major funding bill.
That's right. Last week, after a vote that lasted 18 hours, Senate Republicans finally approved a bill to fund ICE and the Border Patrol for the remainder of President Trump's term.
And why did it require 18 hours to pass this bill? Didn't it ultimately pass along party lines?
Yes, eventually every Republican but one voted in favor of the bill.
Who was the one who didn't? Was it Lisa Murkowski?
It was Lisa Murkowski.
God, I hate her.
She's the worst.
What took so long then, if even with the betrayal of the traitorous senior senator from Alaska, the Republicans had the votes?
The vote was delayed by repeated attempts to introduce amendments to alter, limit, or outright eliminate support for President Trump's recently announced $1.8 billion fund to pay restitution to those who have been wrongfully targeted by the government for their political beliefs. These efforts were supported by a small number of Republicans and took several hours to resolve so that the chamber could move on and vote to approve the bill.
This $1.8 billion fund has been a topic of controversy ever since it was first announced. What have administration officials said in response to accusations that it amounts to a slush fund, which Trump can and will spend however he chooses?
Correct.
Have they sought to characterize it in any other way? Slush fund generally has a negative connotation.
Not this time. In this case, the slush in slush fund is an acronym which stands for selflessly lifting up screwed heroes.
Who could possibly have a problem with that? How did President Trump react to the news that the bill passed without any restrictions to the slush fund?
The final vote did not conclude until around 5 a.m., so the president was asleep at the time. However, my sources tell me that once the vote was closed and the bill passed, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was awakened by a notification on his phone, and he subsequently got up from his customary spot on the floor at the foot of the president's bed and gently whispered the good news into President Trump's ear, at which point the president emitted a cloud of particularly sweet-smelling flatulence to indicate his approval.
How splendidly in character for all involved. What about the accusation, increasingly coming from voices on both ends of the political spectrum, that the Republicans in Congress are abdicating their legislative responsibilities in favor of serving as spineless minions to the president?
They're all fine with it.
They're fine with being characterized as weak-willed followers rather than leaders and representatives of the people?
Well, I don't think they would choose to describe themselves that way.
They wouldn't describe themselves as weak-willed followers?
No, that other thing you said. The Republican senators I've spoken to about this all insist that they are, in fact, independent thinkers who act according to their own consciences and to the needs of the people of their respective states and the nation as a whole, and also they are loyal allies of Donald Trump, and the president can always count on them to support him no matter what. It's like being a Christian and being against allowing refugees into the country. Both things can be true.
And surely, in an unlikely and extremely hypothetical scenario where President Trump did ask them to support him in carrying out a truly harmful or unconstitutional policy, they would oppose him in that imaginary situation, theoretically.
It's best not to speculate, especially about something like that, which would never happen. What I do know is many of the Republican lawmakers I've spoken to have expressed their frustration with being constantly questioned by members of the media who seem determined to force them into publicly disagreeing with President Trump on some minor point. For example, whether or not they agree with President Trump's continuing assertions that the 2020 election was stolen and he actually won it.
You've never asked a member of Congress that question?
No, that's a CBS question. Well, not anymore.
But if you did ask a Republican in Congress that question, you believe they would answer honestly and not merely say what they think President Trump wants to hear?
Any person of integrity would have to answer the question honestly.
Would you?
Of course.
Well,
Well, what?
do you think he won in 2020?
Do I think who won in 2020? They taught us to formulate our questions precisely where I went to journalism school.
You went to journalism school at your mother's dining room table.
Still counts.
Do you think Donald Trump won the presidential election in 2020?
What do you think?
I'm asking you.
Now I'm asking you.
I asked you first.
I'll answer if you will.
Moving on to the next item in the roundup, the Supreme Court... No! Cut it! Cut all the cowboy stuff! I'm not doing any of it. It was a bad idea. The Supreme Court ruled last week that Republican lawmakers in the state of Alabama are allowed to implement a new congressional map that includes 6 Republican-leaning districts and only 1 Democratic-leaning district. What can you tell us about that?
I can tell you that the Trump administration, as well as congressional Republicans, were very pleased with the court's decision, as it makes the party's chances of holding on to their majority in the House of Representatives during the upcoming midterm elections that much better. However, I know that there is also a lot of anger and disappointment from Republicans in Congress toward their counterparts in the Alabama state legislature.
Really? Why is that?
Because they were only able to draw a map with 6 out of 7 Republican districts. Party officials who support the ongoing so-called redistricting arms race have viewed Alabama as an important test case. If lawmakers in that state, in which Black Americans account for more than 1/4 of the total population, could successfully produce a map with nothing but Republican-leaning districts, the hope was all other states currently controlled by the Republican Party could do the same, now that the Supreme Court clearly endorses the practice.
So what's the problem? Why weren't the Alabama Republicans able to do it?
The 2 biggest obstacles, so I'm told, are the requirement that the congressional districts be contiguous, that is, drawn in such a way so that it is possible to travel from any point in the district to any other point in the district without crossing over into another district, and the requirement that all districts within a state have the same number of people with a certain allowable deviation. If those, let's call them shackles, were to be removed, Alabama legislators would be free to disperse all voters registered with a certain political party, for example, Democrats, or all voters of a particular racial group, let's say Black people, to districts throughout the state where they would always be outnumbered by the Republican voters, as the framers of the Constitution intended.
Not exactly, but close. Have the congressional Republicans who are displeased by the efforts of the Alabama legislators offered any assistance in drawing a map that favors their party more comprehensively?
Some have offered suggestions, but of course many of those suggestions are contingent on one or both of those obstacles I already mentioned being removed. For example, all the Democrats in the state could be sorted into the same single district.
Wouldn't that leave them with the same problem they have with this new map?
Not if you'd let me finish a goddamn sentence before stepping all over me.
Today's not the day! Today's not the day!
Anyway, the point is, the single Democratic district would then be designated as a quarantine zone for voters whose party affiliation qualifies them to be labeled terrorists or enemies of the state or something.
You said voters. They'd still be allowed to vote?
Yes, but they wouldn't have any representation in Congress. The law says you have the right to vote. It doesn't say your vote has to count for anything.
I'm not sure that's actually true.
Give it time. None of this is legal at the moment, but all it takes to change that is to get a case in front of the Supreme Court. The right-leaning majority will strike down whatever law stands in the way, and there you go. The Republicans and President Trump can legally do whatever they want, thanks to the long-standing and widely embraced conservative tradition of activist judges legislating from the bench.
I love it when a plan comes together. One last item in the roundup. Bob, get your fucking hand away from that soundboard! Last week, President Trump signed an executive order stripping protections from 8,000 federal workers, turning them into at-will employees who can essentially be fired at any time for any reason. What was the rationale behind making this change?
Actually, I believe it's pronounced rationale. The rationale behind this move is twofold and can be summed up in 2 words: efficiency and fairness.
Increasing efficiency of federal agencies and treating workers at all levels with fairness?
What? No. Treating President Trump with fairness and allowing him to do his job more efficiently. Prior to beginning his political career, President Trump was best known as the host of The Apprentice, on which he was famous for firing people. Firing people is one of the things he's best at, along with making deals and not starting wars. This executive order increases the number of people Trump is allowed to fire as president, which means he will be able to do one of the things he's best at more often, thus increasing governmental efficiency. It's simple math, and you can't argue with math. And as for fairness, when Donald Trump was a boss in the private sector, he could fire anyone who worked at one of his companies. Now that he's the president, which is the boss of the federal government, it's only fair that he also be able to fire anyone he wants there, too.
What about the idea that beyond direct political appointments, federal employees should be protected from these sorts of arbitrary terminations in order to ensure that they carry out their vital work in an apolitical manner, regardless of who happens to be in power at any given time?
What about the idea that President Trump doesn't want it to be that way? Let us not forget the American people voted for Donald Trump to run the government as he sees fit, and he was elected in a landslide.
And how many elections did he win?
I'll say if you will.
That's all the time we have. We'll check in with you next time for another edition of the Political Roundup. I see a finger twitch, Bob, and I'll break your goddamn arm. This is a serious news channel, and we do serious news, not low-brow tabloid trash parades. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. And now, stay tuned for an all-new episode of Real Trad Wives of Oklahoma City. Come here.
Don't run!